Sam Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. Today we're looking at Muldrotha the Gravetide. This is a graveyard strategy through and through, so we're going to capitalize on taking our library and playing it basically from our graveyard. We're going to do a couple reanimator strategies, controlling our opponents in various different ways, whether it be with their creatures, their hand, stuff like that. So let's get right into it. Muldrotha is a very permanent based deck. That's why I'm not running very many instants and sorceries. And we're going to capitalize on the dredge mechanic. Let's start off with the sorceries. There's only 5. And probably the best one we're going to do is Life on the Loam. This will allow us to return lands from our graveyard back to our hand that we can use in many different ways. But this is going to be our main dredge card. Now we have Green Sun Zenith, so we can go get whatever green creature we want. Now we have Reanimate. Reanimate is the best reanimation spell in Magic the Gathering. Now we have a bunch of removal with Toxic Deluge. And we are playing Windfall. Windfall is going to benefit us very much because it's going to put many cards into the graveyard all at once. And because we're drawing cards, it'll trigger Dredge. Okay, we got some Planeswalkers because we're playing Windfall. We are playing Narset Parter of Veils. We are playing Liliana of the Veil. That way we can continually discard cards and we can control our opponent's creatures. And if we get to emblem this, it's going to be very good. Now we have Ashiok Dreamrender. Ashiok is going to prevent our opponents from searching while putting a lot of cards into our graveyard. Now we have Oko Thief of Crowns. This guy really doesn't need much introduction. Now we have Grist the Hungertide. What makes this guy very powerful is he can generate creatures for us. He can deal with our opponent's creatures. And when he's not on the battlefield, he's a creature. Now we have Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. This guy is pretty much only here to put stuff in the graveyard, trigger Dredge, but also he's a win condition. Okay, now we have Tamio, Collector of Tales. The whole reason Tamio is here is to put stuff in our graveyard, but also if we need to return a very specific card, we can do that with her. Okay, we got a couple instants. First up, we have Crop Rotation. That way we can go get whatever certain land we want. And we have Entomb. Entomb is going to go get whatever card we want and put it right in the graveyard. Now we have 2 very specific cards that are only here for Thassa's Oracle. And that's Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. Of course, we're playing Sol Ring. We have our Arcane Signet. We have our Chromatic Lantern. I like running Chromatic Lantern in decks that are 3 or more colors. And in case we don't have Raminap Excavator or Muldrotha out, we have Crucible of Worlds, so we can continually play lands from our graveyard. Now we have Altar of Dementia. We're going to primarily use this on ourselves to put a large amount of cards into our graveyard. Now we have Mesmeric Orb. Mesmeric Orb is pretty much here just to benefit us by putting cards in our graveyard, but it's going to affect your opponents too. Okay, now we have a very powerful artifact with Lion's Eye Diamond. Lion's Eye Diamond is probably the best in this deck because we're going to discard our hand and we're going to get 3 mana of 1 color. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. First up is Carpet of Flowers. Now we have Sylvan Library. Sylvan Library will benefit us very much because this will give us additional draws which will trigger Dredge. Now we have Exploration. That way we can play additional lands. Now we have Seal of Primordium. That way we can deal with our opponent's artifacts and enchantments. And if that's not enough, we have Pernicious Deed. That way we can destroy artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Now we have my favorite enchantment in black. Is Grave Pact. Now we have 3 very powerful reanimation permanents with Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, and Necromancy. We're going to continually bring very powerful creatures from our graveyard on the battlefield as many times as possible. Every single turn. Okay. Let's get into the creatures. The very first creature is going to be responsible for putting the most amount of cards into our graveyard. And that is Hermit Druid. We can do this during the upkeep. That way we have a very large graveyard to work with. Now we have Fauna Shaman. We're going to use Fauna Shaman as much as possible to get the creatures we need in the graveyard while searching for other creatures that we need. Now we have Ledger Shredder. That way, every single time we can use the Connive, which will trigger Dredge, and then we still get a discard. And here's the Thassa's Oracle. Really don't need to explain too much about this. Now we have Laboratory Maniac. Similar to the G, we can win the game just with Laboratory Maniac in case we don't have Thassa's Oracle. Okay. I'm only running 2 Dredge creatures. First up is the iconic Golgari Grave Troll and Stinkweed Imp. Now we have Raminep Excavator. That way we can keep playing lands from our graveyard. Okay. Now we have the 3 best additional land creatures with Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Azusa Lost But Seeking, and Oracle of Moldiah. Now we have Delighted Halfling. Delighted Halfling is probably the best mana dork in all of Commander. Okay, now we have a bunch of creatures that are going to synergize with everything we're doing. And probably the best reanimation target is Archon of Cruelty. Now we have Grief. We're going to use Grief to basically pick apart our opponent's hands as many times as possible. Now we have Shieldred Whispering One. This is the original Shieldred, but we're going to force our opponents to sacrifice a creature every single upkeep, and we're going to return a creature from any graveyard every single upkeep. Now we have Sidisi Undead Vizier. The reason I'm not playing Demonic Tutor itself is because Sidisi Undead Vizier is Demonic Tutor as a permanent form. Okay, now we have Spore Frog. Spore Frog is going to look at your opponent's board full of creatures and just kind of laugh. Because all those creatures are never going to deal combat damage to you. Okay, now we have a very powerful one with Playcrafter. Playcrafter is going to deal with your opponent's creatures and planeswalkers, but also, if they can't sacrifice it, then they have to discard. Now we have Sylvan Safekeeper. So Sylvan Safekeeper is going to protect all of our creatures by sacrificing land. And we're going to actually benefit from sacrificing lands with the next two creatures, such as Titania, Protector of Argoth. When Titania enters the battlefield, she'll return a land from our graveyard onto the battlefield. But whenever a land is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we get a 5/3 elemental. So if we're protecting other creatures by sacrificing a land, it's going to trigger Titania, giving us another creature. And also, we have the Gitrog monster. This is a big frog, but this is going to synergize by allowing us to play additional lands, and whenever a land is put into a graveyard from anywhere, we get to draw a card. So the synergy between Titania, Sylvan Safekeeper, and the Gitrog are very, very good. And because we're drawing the card, we get to trigger Dredge as well. Now we have Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness is primarily here just to get back the cards that we're not able to get back. Now we have Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. This guy is going to do everything we want it to do. He's going to gain us life. He's going to draw cards. He's going to put additional lands on the battlefield. And we're almost never going to escape this card because we can just pay 3 mana and get all this value. Now we have Muldrifter. Similar to Uro, we're not going to cast Muldrifter for its original mana cost. We're going to cast these creatures for their evoke cost. Evoke creatures are very powerful in this kind of strategy. And when Muldrifter enters the battlefield, we're going to draw 2 cards, which is going to trigger Dredge 2 times. Similar to that, we have Foundation Breaker. That way we can continually destroy our opponent's artifacts and enchantments. Now we have Noxious Gearhulk. Noxious Gearhulk is going to enter the battlefield and destroy whatever creature we want, but we're going to gain life equal to that destroyed creature's toughness. So we can potentially gain a lot of life. Now we have Vampire Hexmage. We're going to use Hexmage in a couple different ways. It's primarily here for a very specific land, but if our opponents have creatures that have a bunch of +1 counters on them, we can remove those counters. And also, for 2 mana, we can destroy any of our opponent's Planeswalkers just by removing the counters. Now we have a very powerful one with Dauthi Voidwalker. We're going to use Dauthi Voidwalker to deal with our opponent's graveyard by preventing those cards ever going to the graveyard. Now we have the Troll of Khazad-dûm. This guy is pretty much here just to go get a swamp card, but if you can get this guy out pretty early, he's a 6/5, and that's pretty good. Now we have Hostage Taker. Hostage Taker is going to be very fun because we're just going to keep exiling our opponent's artifacts or creatures. And to punish our opponents even more for drawing cards, we are playing Orcish Bowmasters. Okay, that was the creatures. Let me know what y'all thought about that. And if you guys have any suggestions, just put them in the comments below. Okay, let's get into the land base. We're only running one of each basic. This is only for Hermit Druid. So we have our forest, our swamp, and our island. Now we have Command Tower. We have Reflecting Pool. Now we have Polluted Delta, Misty Rainforest, and Verdant Catacombs. The fetch lands are going to pair very nicely with Titania. And the Gitrog monster. Now we have our Zagoth Triumph, our Watery Grave, our Breeding Pool, our Overgrown Tomb, our Hedge Maze, which is the new Surveil land, Underground Mortuary. Now we have our Battle Bond lands with Undergrowth Stadium, Morphic Pool, and Rejuvenating Springs. Now we have our 3 filter lands. We have Flooded Grove, Sunken Ruins, and Twilight Mire. We are running the 3 Kamigawa lands because each one is going to be very unique. So we have Takanuma, Adawara, and Beseju. Now we have Nurturing Peatland and Waterlogged Grove. These 2 are going to help us by producing the color we need, but also just by sacrificing it, we're going to trigger Dredge just with the land. Now we have Shifting Woodland. This is a newer addition to this deck, and I wanted to try it out because getting Delirium is pretty easy in this deck. So having Shifting Woodland become a copy of any permanent in our graveyard just seemed really good. Now we have Dakmor Salvage. This is just going to be a recurring land with Dredge. That way we can sacrifice this to ensure Dakmor Salvage is in our graveyard. Now we have Bojuka Bog in case we just need to keep exiling our opponent's graveyard. Now we have our Woodland Cemetery, our Drowned Catacomb, and our Hinterland Harbor as our check lands. Now we have Command Beacon. Command Beacon is going to be very good because Muldrotha does cost 6 mana, but also we can continually get Muldrotha back. This will help us avoid the commander tax. Now we have Glacial Chasm. Glacial Chasm is going to be very powerful. It'll prevent all the damage done to you, and when it enters, we have to sacrifice a land. But that's going to trigger Titania or the Gitrog monster as well. Now we have Cephalic Coliseum. Cephalic Coliseum, I feel, is probably the strongest land in this deck. For the simple fact of, we're going to draw 3 cards and then discard 3. So the initial draw 3 is going to trigger Dredge 3 times. And then we can put 3 cards we really need in our graveyard. Now we have the Dark Depths. This was the land that pairs very nicely with Vampire Hexmage because we're going to continually get this Merit Lage token. And just to ensure that, we have Thespian Stage. Okay. And that was the Commander deck tech for Muldrotha the Gravetide. I really hope you guys enjoyed this list. This is one of my favorite strategies in Commander. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow me on TikTok, share these videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.